Hey, good morning and welcome to Cornerstone, where we exist to love our God, to grow in our faith, and to serve each other. Thank you for joining us for our online service this week. We are in week 2 of a series called Under God, and this series is a powerful series that helps us as a church and as believers reflect on not only what's going on in our country with the elections and all the turmoil and things that we're experiencing in our world right now, but it's also a reflective series that has us take an introspective look into our own lives and to make sure that we are living our lives under God. So thank you for joining us again this week. I'll remind you, Cornerstone Kids and Crave Student Ministries, your lesson plans are available online, and you can get them linked on our Facebook page and on our YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube this morning. As always, we want to thank you for your continued generosity here at Cornerstone, your continued tithes and offerings, and we want to continue to encourage you to do that. There are a couple of links and ways that you can continue with your generosity listed below. Our men's Bible studies and our ladies' Bible studies are back up and running. Guys, we are not meeting this week. We're meeting the following Monday at 7 o'clock here at the church. And ladies, you are meeting every week at 7:30 on Thursdays. So before we get into this series and week 2 of this series, let's begin this time of worship with the time of prayer. God, thank you for this morning. I pray that we are encouraged and blessed by your word this morning. So bless each and every one that is watching, that is listening. God, let us have open hearts and open minds to receive your word. And God, bless this time of worship we're about to go into. In your name, amen.
From wherever you've been, come broken-hearted, let the rescue begin. Come find your mercy, oh sinner, come kneel. 'Cause earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. 'Cause earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burden, all who are broken, just lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, 'cause you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your hearts, and come as you are. There's hope for the hopeless and all who have strayed. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, rest that endures. 'Cause earth has no sorrow that heaven can cure. 'Cause earth has no sorrow that heaven can cure. So lay down your burden, all who are broken, just lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, 'cause you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your hearts, come as you are. Up your face.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
All right, so we are back in week 2 of our series Under God, and the title of today's sermon is actually this: What are you under? Now, I don't know about you, I personally have been feeling a spiritual burden, an unusual spiritual burden to talk about this subject matter, to get into what is our role and what is our responsibility as believers when it comes to not only the election in our country and the choosing of a new president, but even more so, what is our responsibility in our role as believers to represent Christ during this time. So maybe you're feeling a little spiritual burden as well. Maybe this has been a tough time for you, not only this year, right, 2020, but these last few months as things start to escalate and things start pointing us towards November 3rd. We want to talk about that this morning. I personally believe that this message has the potential to make an immediate impact into your life. I know those are big words, I know those are big promises, so to speak, but I really believe that the conversation that we are going to have today is a conversation that you should continue outside of the context of this message, of this video today. It should be a conversation that you have with your spouse, with your family, with other loved ones, with your coworkers, with your friends, maybe over lunch this afternoon. Whatever the case may be, my prayer and my challenge to you this morning, I'm going to challenge you to actually work with me. I have a couple things that I need you to interact with me. I need you to answer either in your head or write stuff down. But this message is dependent on you being very open and honest with yourself with the topics that we are going to be talking about. So if you're unfamiliar, if you weren't joining us last week we talked about one nation. And what we have done is we've taken the Pledge of Allegiance and we're allowing some themes to develop out of the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to say the pledge again this morning and I'll tell you where we're at. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and with justice for all. Last week, we talked about and expanded on what the concept of what is one nation, and we are one nation of believers. Yes, we might be citizens of the United States of America. You might be a citizen of whatever country you're watching me in right now, but as a believer, as a Christ follower, you are also part of one nation of believers. And we talked about that role and responsibility. When we are a representation of a nation of believers, we are God's ambassadors to this world. We are to go into all the world and to preach the gospel to every creature. We are called to be His ambassadors. So in the midst of the chaos and political turmoil, and the understanding, and even this morning as I'm talking to you, some of you are definitely voting for one guy for president. Someone else, another group are going to be definitely voting for the other guy for president. And I'm sure there might be some in the middle that's just going to go with a third party or maybe not vote at all. And that's your right as well. But the point is, through all of this, we are going to explore some topics and what is our responsibility as believers. So to follow the themes that come out of the Pledge of Allegiance. We talked about one nation last week. This week we are talking about what it is to be under God. And we're going to spend a lot of time diving into that. And then next week we're going to explore the topic of indivisible. How do we get along spiritually when we may disagree politically? How do we get along spiritually when we may very well disagree with somebody spiritually? How do we manage that? How do we cope with that? And the week 4, we're going to talk about liberty and justice for all. And we're going to use the example of Jesus and how He brought grace and truth to all. Love the world with grace and not compromise the truth. We're going to learn how to do that in week 4. But let us get in this morning to what it is to live under God. How do we as Christ followers live under God in a culture that is increasingly becoming more hostile towards the things of God. A little backstory to all of this. Do you understand that actually the phrase under God was not originally in the Pledge of Allegiance? Many don't know that originally it did not include that, and then when it was originally composed in 1887 by a man named Colonel George Bullock, he was a Baptist minister, but he actually did not include the phrase under God in the original Pledge of Allegiance. It wasn't until 1954, in response to some communist threats that were happening to our country, that at the time President Eisenhower suggested to Congress that we add the additional phrase, one nation under God. So there's some good American history for you this morning as we talk about that theme, under God. If you are a Jesus follower, here's my question to you this morning. If you are a Jesus follower, how do you live under God in a world that is becoming increasingly hostile towards the things of God? And I told you this is going to be an interactive message this morning. And I want you to ask yourself this question, be ready to answer, and you're going to have to think about it. And in fact, you're probably going to have to sit on it during this whole course of this message and really try to formalize what your actual answer would be. I'm going to ask it this way. Are you under the influence of culture or under the influence of God? So to help you make that determination, are you living under an influence of the culture that we are in? Or are you more aligned to the influence and living under God? I'm going to throw a scale up here right below me right now. And the scale goes 1 to 10. And I want you to think about, if you were to put a score, a grade on where you live, are you more under the culture that we live in, or are you living more under God? What score would you give yourself in a 1 through 10 scale? Now, off the top of your head, instead of just like most of us do when we get these kind of surveys, we just go 5 down the middle, right? I don't want you to do that. I want you to be really honest with yourself. If you're not honest with yourself this morning, you're not going to be able to process and to make some changes and some resolutions in your own life. So it's very important that you're honest to yourself. So don't just rush to pick a number in your head. Really think about that. And to help you with that, I'm going to give you some categories. And when I give you those categories, maybe it's going to help you make that decision of where you would score yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning I'm under culture, I'm completely influenced by the culture around me, or 10 being I am completely influenced by God. Nothing else distracts me. I am where I need to be. I am focused the way I need to be. I am a 10. I am completely under God. So to help you kind of process that, let me give you some categories for you to consider this morning. So here we go. Think about how you were entertained. When I talk about entertainment, right? With the movies that you watch, the TV shows that you might watch as well, books that you read, things like that. When you were entertained, are you entertained by things that are more influenced by culture, or do you allow those things to process through God's filter and try to watch things and entertain yourselves with the things that are holy and acceptable and pleasing to God? Money. The paycheck that you get, the money that you get, when you get that paycheck, when you look at that paycheck, do you immediately think about, what can I buy with this? What other things can I buy? The things I've been saving up for, what can I buy with this? Or do you look at that paycheck and the first thing you think of is, how can I bless God with this? Knowing and maybe having understanding that this money, God, anything and everything that God gives to you is His. And He makes us stewards of these things, of these possessions. And do we look at our paychecks and do we first think about, what can I do to honor God, to please God, to give this back to God? Think about the words that you use, and just make it a smaller context. Think about the words that you used this last week. Were the words that you spoke to each other, were they pleasing, were they honorable? Were you talking trash about somebody? Were you gossiping a little bit? Were you cursing a little bit? We're dropping some curse words here and there, and you're saying, no, I'm not perfect, of course I do that. Well, of course you're not perfect. But the point is, are you more influenced by culture, allow those things to take over your lives, or are you more influenced by the things of God? Think about the time that you spend. Do you realize that, and do you live life understanding that the time we have here on earth is just a whisper in the wind? It's a fleeting moment. And though years go on, it seems like it takes forever and ever. In the context of eternity, our time here is very minute. It's very small. And do we live our lives like that? Do we try to maximize our time with God, understanding that our time here is very limited and the mission that we've been given here is very important? Think about your self-worth. Your self-worth. Where do you draw your own self-worth? Do you have confidence under God, knowing that you are uniquely and wonderfully made and you were created in His image, and because of that, you should have high self-esteem and high self-worth, knowing that you are a child of God? Or is your self-worth derived from what you think other people think about you? Are you constantly worried about how people are understanding you, how people are, if they like you or don't like you? You ever text somebody and you wait in eager anticipation for them to text you back, and if it waits more than 5 minutes, you're saying, oh my goodness, they're mad at me. Where do you derive your self-worth from? Even after giving you those categories, chances are very good that you still don't totally know on that 1 through 10 scale, where do you fall? So I'm going to share with you an example, and maybe this is a good way for you to understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being under control of God and being a person that's under the control and influence of the world. All right, to help us to understand this, and the reason that it might be hard for you to right now give me a number, am I more under God, am I more under the influence of the world? Well, I'm asking you this. Have you ever been around anybody that's under the influence of alcohol, that's drunk? You can raise your hand if you want, you can just think about it in your head, but have you ever been around somebody that's under the influence of alcohol? And just agree with me after I say these sayings, and let me know if they sound true or not. So do you think that alcohol changes the way that person thinks? I absolutely do, right? I think it changes the way that people think. Do you think it changes how funny they think they are? Sometimes people, when they're drunk, do they tell us funny, silly jokes that are not really silly, but they're laughing anyways? How about the way that they talk? Do they slur their words? Do they even realize that they're slurring the words? How about this one? You ever heard this whole thing? The more you drink, the more attractive someone else gets to look. And after maybe 6 drinks, you start feeling yourself that you're very attractive, right? So does it change what we consider to be attractive? How about, does it change who you love? You know, you're drinking, and all of a sudden you turn to the guy and you say, oh, I love you, man. You're speaking to the bartender. I love you, man. I don't know how I live my life without you. Does it ever change who you love? I'm going to tell you something about the influence of alcohol. Alcohol tends to lower our guard. It tends to make us more vulnerable. And if you're under the influence of alcohol, you do not always realize that you are under the influence of alcohol. Do you see how that works? And here's the thing, when you're talking to someone that's under influence of alcohol, and you even say to them, man, I think you've had too much to drink. I think you're a little drunk. What do they sometimes say back to you? I'm not drunk. I'm fine. I can drink a few more. I can drive, whatever. Because when people are under the influence of alcohol, there are times where they don't even realize that they are under that influence, and more so, they don't even realize the things that they're saying, the things that they are doing, because they are under the influence. I'm not drunk. I'm okay. What if we are so intoxicated by the culture around us that we aren't even aware how far we have drifted from God? Let me say it again. I'm going to say it slower so it can sink in a little bit. What if we are so intoxicated with culture that we aren't even aware how far we've drifted from God? Personalize that. What if I have become so intoxicated by culture that I don't even realize how far I have drifted from God? We talk about influence, and we talk about how easy it is for some of us to be lured into the intoxicating power and illusion of culture around us, and how we feel that's going to fulfill our needs. I'm going to go into the Old Testament. I'm going to talk about Daniel. Now, many of you know about the story of Daniel in the lion's den, and you understand that he was thrown into this den of lions, and that God protected him and God saved him. And in the morning, when they thought he was going to be killed, and they actually discovered that he was alive, that he had been saved. I'm giving you the backstory of how Daniel actually ended up there, and it's very pertinent to our discussion this morning. See, Daniel was raised worshiping Yahweh, worshiping God. And despite every cultural temptation, he remained completely under God. See, he was taken with a number of other young men from Israel. He was taken by this king named King Nebuchadnezzar, his Babylonian king. And they was taken to the kingdom, to the Babylonian kingdom, and they were intentionally indoctrinated into the Babylonian culture. And they were actually being trained to even become future leaders of that culture. We're going to go to Daniel chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, and read here together. Ashpenaz, by the way, what a great name for his parents to name him. But right, Ashpenaz, king of courts, was to teach them, the young men, the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So you see what they did there. They would take these young men and they would completely indoctrinate them into the Babylonian culture. They would give them food from the king's table himself. They'd give them food from the king's table, and they would train them, in other words, indoctrinate them, teach them, and so that after 3 years they would be so indoctrinated by that culture that they would in turn become leaders within that culture. They changed their language, they changed their education. They started indoctrinating them with Babylonian thoughts. They even changed their diet. And here's where Daniel started to get into trouble here. See, the food that was being given at the king's table was food that had been dedicated to the pagan gods. And that's going to come back, and that's going to be that line in the sand that Daniel said, I am not going to cross. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Let me continue here for a second. They even changed their names. The Hebrew names that they were given at birth, they even changed those names. See, they tried everything they could to completely indoctrinate these young men into the Babylonian culture. Here's the strategy that they used. And this same strategy is things that we are still dealing with in this world around us. The strategy was this: change what you think, that will change what you believe, that will change how you behave. Let's say that again. Change what you think, change what you believe, change how you behave. Culture is trying to change how we think, how we believe. I hope you understand that this morning. The fact that the world around us, the culture around us would love to shift our focus away from the things of God and have us be completely influenced by the things of this world. Let me tell you something else this morning. You cannot be a halfway follower of Jesus. Being a follower of Jesus, you're all in or you're all out. You can't just say, I like the God thing. I like coming to church every once in a while. I like cracking my Bible open every once in a while when I'm having struggles. I sit down and pray. But you really can't be a halfway follower of Jesus. You can't passively follow Jesus. There are many people who say, yeah, I can do the God thing, but I continue to struggle. You know, Pastor, I come to church every once in a while. You know, sometimes I read God's word, sometimes I pray, yet I continue to have struggles in my life. You know, spiritually, I'm just not feeling where I need to be. And let me tell you one of the possible reasons that is this morning. Because you cannot halfway follow Jesus. You will get lulled back into complacency. So you can't halfway follow Jesus. You can't passively be a disciple of Jesus. Lukewarm Christianity is not good enough. New Testament talks about that. Lukewarm Christianity is not good enough. I'm here to tell you today that there is something much better, much greater, much more fulfilling than lukewarm, halfway follower of Jesus. To get that point across, if I made that argument in any other area of your life, you would all agree with me. It would just kind of click and kind of make sense to you. So let me try that. Have any of you decided, you know what, I'm going to get in better shape? I want to be in better shape. I want to feel healthier. I want to look healthier. I want to be stronger. So this is what I'm going to do to get in better shape. Every other week or so, I'm going to hit the gym for like an hour. And maybe once or twice every other week, and maybe every week, I'm going to eat a healthy meal. But that's going to get me in shape really quick. I hate to tell you, going to the gym once every 2 weeks and eating one healthy meal every 2 weeks is not going to get you in good shape. I think you would all agree with me this morning. Let's do it a different way. I want to have a healthy marriage. I love my spouse. I want to have a healthy marriage, so this is what I'm going to do. Like every once in a while, every couple weeks, maybe every 3 weeks, I'm going to spend a good quality hour with my spouse, and I'm going to love on them, and I'm going to tell how much I care about them, and we're going to have a powerful marriage because I spent that 1 hour with them every 2 weeks or so. Let me tell you, that's not going to work. If it's not going to work in your marriage, this is not going to work for your physical health. Why did we fool ourselves into thinking that we can be spiritually strong, all in followers of Jesus by simply and by only spending time with Him maybe once a week, maybe it's every other week, maybe it's just when you feel like getting up on a Sunday morning and tuning into church or driving there, so maybe it's maybe once a month. How are you going to have a healthy spiritual life? How are you going to live under the influence of God if you are not taking care of yourself? You can't get healthy by eating a healthy meal every other week. You can't have a strong marriage by spending very little time invested into that marriage. So how are you going to live under God and not be lured into the alluring world of the culture of the world? How are you doing that if you're not spending the time that you need to? The massive pull of culture away from Christ intoxicates us to a point that we have no idea how far we have drifted from God. Just like the drunk doesn't know how drunk he actually is when he's under the influence of alcohol, sometimes we are so under the influence of the world and culture around us that we have no idea how far we have drifted from God. Picking back up in Daniel chapter 1 verse 8 says this, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine." I underlined Daniel resolved not to defile himself. Why don't you say that with me this morning? Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. See, Daniel, when they changed Daniel's name, he didn't fight when his name was taken away from him. To him, that was just an outward label. It wasn't a representation of who he was in Yahweh, who he was in God. He knew that it wasn't his name even to defend. See, but when they tried to defile his God by having him eat food that was dedicated to pagan gods, that's where he started and to draw a line. He says, I am not eating food that's been dedicated to pagan gods. I serve the one true God, Yahweh. I am not allowing that food to enter my body. He resolved in his heart that he was not going to defile the name of his God. He said, you know what? Everybody else can. I can't speak for anybody else. The other guys that you brought from the other Jewish men you brought with me, they have to make those own decisions in their life. I don't care if everybody else is doing it. I don't care that it's really not going to hurt anybody. He's talking about eating food. He understands that it's not going to hurt him or hurt anybody else for him to do that. He understands that even if he did do that, his God would still love him. His God would still take care of him and protect him. But no, he drew a line in the sand and said, I will not defile my God in this way. He made a resolution in his heart, and that was a line that he was not going to cross. My challenge to you this morning, if you are committed to living a life under God, we need to make some predetermined resolutions in our lives. We need to make some resolution in our hearts. We need to draw some lines in some sand and tell people and tell the culture around us and tell the devil that we are not crossing those lines. We are committed to living our lives under the influence of God, not under the influence of the culture and the world around us. So like Daniel, we need to take a stand. Even if it gets us thrown into a den of lions, which is what happened to Daniel, he still took that stand. We need to make a predetermined resolution in our heart that there is a line that we are not going to cross. So this is where I mentioned at the beginning, I need you to do some work with me this morning. This is where we start to really get to work. What decisions do you need to make to continue to grow and be fully under God instead of being lured into living under the influence of our culture? And we're still trying to answer the ultimate question on a scale from 1 to 10. Are you living more under the influence of the world, of culture, or are you living under the influence of God? And we're still working that out in our process and our conversation this morning. But to help us along that way, I need you to do something for me. I need you to think about 3 areas in your life that you're going to commit to resolving to God. You're going to draw some lines in some sand, and you're going to say, I am resolved, I am predetermined, that I'm not going to cross that line. To help you along that way, I'm going to give you just some different categories and different things in my own life that I'm striving to do better at, and I'm striving to draw some lines in some sand, and some things that years ago I said to myself, I'm committed, I am resolved, I'm predetermined not to do these things. And I'm going to share some of those things with you this morning to maybe help you in your own thought process of what 3 things that you would consider this morning. And if 3 things are too much for you to consider this morning, if it's too much thinking, too much writing, think about one thing. Out of this conversation, think about one thing that you're going to resolve to draw a line in the sand and not let the influence of culture change in your heart. That you are going to commit to God. To give you some ideas, first of all, I committed at a very young age that I'm not going to get drunk. I'm not going to get drunk. Now, there's many people, and this is not a conversation on whether you should have alcohol or not. You know, that's something you got to figure out yourself and read Scripture. See, I interpret Scripture to say that I should not be drunk. It doesn't say I shouldn't drink. It says I shouldn't be drunk. And because of that, I've made a decision that I'm not going to drink at all. I made a decision I'm not going to drink at all. I'm not saying that's what you have to do this morning, but that's a resolution, that's a line in the sand that I drew because I never want to cross that line and get into a place where I am making bad decisions, right, or whatever. But that's one of the things I've resolved in my life. You know, maybe for you, maybe you're going to resolve about the entertainment that you enjoy in your life, the movies that you watch, you know, the TV shows that you enjoy. You know, you could watch a really raunchy comedy and it's a rated R comedy. So you go, but Sean, it's so funny. Let me tell you something. Funny doesn't make wrong right. Funny doesn't make wrong right. We have to have a resolve that we are going to be influenced by the things of God. And so those things of culture that try to change our thoughts, our way we think, you know, our actions, our beliefs, those types of things, some of us need to resolve and say, we are not allowing those things to cross over into our lives. You know, some of us say, well, yeah, but there's that favorite TV show, that TV show that everybody else is watching. I mean, it's not going to hurt anybody if I watch it. Again, that's a decision that you have to make yourself. But I can tell you, some people, you binge watch sin. You binge watch things that are influence you in ways that you don't even realize. So maybe that's what you need to draw a line in the sand and resolve and say, you know what? This is taking away some spiritual joy in my life. This is causing me to not be spiritually fulfilled in the way that I know I should be through Christ. Maybe you need to have a resolution about where you spend your money. Being a good steward of the finances that God has given you and God has blessed you with. You know, maybe you make a predetermined resolution that I'm going to, when I get that paycheck, I'm going to give back to God. And I'm not going to wait to the end of the month and just see how much money I've left over and then tithe off of that. On the onset, when I get paid, I'm going to commit this part to God. And I'm going to build my faith and build my trust because my God will always take care of me. See, sometimes we have to give, and not just financially, but of our talents and of our abilities. We have to give to allow God to fill us back up and to allow God to take care of us. As Jesus followers, we don't run from culture. We influence it. We influence it. So this morning, I'm not telling you to be scared of culture. I'm not telling you to be scared of the things of this world. What I'm telling you is that you need to resolve some certain things in your life, predetermine that there's some lines and some boundaries that you are not going to cross. We are salt and we are light. We are set apart. And we are to live holy lives. Holy means we are to be set apart. To live in it, the world, and not of it. We are called to influence it. We are ambassadors for Him, like we talked about last week. That's why we decide ahead of time to resolve to be influenced by God and not our world. We are in this series under God because I understand, again, in the current circumstances and things that we're experiencing in our country right now, there's a lot of uncertainty. But I want to remind you of something this morning. No matter which party holds office, God still holds the world. Our God still holds the world. We make a resolution that for ourselves, for me and my house, we will be influenced by God. We will serve God no matter the outcome. No matter who sits in the White House at the end of November or December or January, I should say, right? No matter who occupies the White House next year, it does not matter. It doesn't matter what president, it doesn't matter what party holds the office. Our God still holds the world. I am committed to that. I have peace in that because I want to be resolved under God. I want to be influenced by the things of God. And if I allow this culture and this world around me to influence me, all that brings is heartache. All that brings is suffering. All that brings is discontent and anger and division. And that's why in just the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about being indivisible next week, right? Talking about, even though we might not agree politically, as brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to be united spiritually. Daniel resolved himself before God. He put a line in the sand. He said, I am not going to cross that line. That is food that's been committed and dedicated to pagan gods, and I will not consume that food because I serve Yahweh. I serve the God of Israel. To faithfully live under God in a culture often opposed to God, we have to make some predetermined resolutions. And in order for us to really make some resolutions in our lives, in our hearts, we need to do something that's found in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. It simply says this: humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time. Repeat this part with me. Therefore, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand. You want to live under influence of God. You live under the influence and under God's mighty hand of protection, of provision, of peace. That's where we live ourselves. And to do that, to resolve ourselves to live under God, we need to humble ourselves. We need to resolve to allow God to show us where we need to resolve ourselves. And say this, maybe you find yourself too intoxicated by culture, right? So you're doing that the 1 through 10 scale, and you're being honest with yourself and saying, I'm a high 7, 8, 9, 10 right now. I can tell you. Right? And if that's you this morning, if you're resolving and saying, I am too intoxicated by culture, show me how to live under God. If you need to resolve areas of your life, resolve that God will reveal those things to you. Humble yourself before God and resolve to live a life under God. See, we don't just wink at God when we need Him. We must submit to Him because He is holy and He is just. Again, in 1 Peter says that He may lift you up in due time. I love that last two words, due time. See, we like answers right away. We are very impatient creatures. We want to know here. We want to know now. We don't want to wait for anything. But God says, humble yourselves under my mighty hand, that I may lift you up in His due time, in God's due time. He has a perfect will, a perfect plan for us. And when it says we must humble ourselves, it doesn't mean that God's going to suppress you, that God's going to dominate you. What it really says is when He lifts you up, see, everything culture says is the exact opposite of what Jesus taught. So when we're talking about resolving ourselves to live under God's mighty hand, it's not so He can suppress us, not that He can dominate us. It is that He can lift us up. See, Jesus is all about lifting us up, about elevating us to another level, about giving us peace and assurance and taking care of every need in our life. Does that sound like a God that's trying to suppress you or to dominate you? No, that is a God that loves and cares for you and wants to lift you up. Culture says, promote yourself. Put yourself first. Get on a social media platform and just build up your following, build up your brand. So culture says, promote yourself. Jesus says, humble yourself. Because you remember, everything culture says tells us is the exact opposite of what Jesus taught. So culture says, promote yourself. Jesus says, humble yourself. Culture says, consume, consume, consume. Get this, get that. This is new. This is the latest version of this. Get that. Consume, consume. Jesus says, give, give, give. Culture says, if someone wrongs you, you got to get back at them. You got to hate them. You've got to get your revenge on them. Jesus says, if someone wrongs you, love them.Culture says, pursue these things. Pursue these possessions. Pursue these attributes. Pursue this. Pursue that. Jesus says, pursue God. Culture says, live for the now. It's all about the day. Live for today. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so just throw it all out there for today. YOLO, right? You only live once. Jesus says, no. You don't live for today. You live for eternity. Culture says, pursue happiness.It's all about what feels good. There's no right or wrong. There's no absolutes. If it feels good to do this, to indulge in this, whether it's a sin or not, just do it. Jesus says that it's not about pursuing happiness. It's about pursuing holiness. See, the culture always tells us the exact thing opposite of what Jesus has commanded us to do.How we become so intoxicated by the seductive, attractive message of the culture that we are living in that we have no idea how far we've drifted from God. You might be worried about, well, if I try to live under God, if I try to turn away and to set some lines and some resolutions in the sand about what I'm going to do and not do in our culture, people are going to make fun of me.People are going to laugh at me. In some cases, people might even begin to persecute me. Jesus talked very clearly about this. He says, if you follow me, just like I have been persecuted here, if you follow me, there's going to be persecution in your life. If you are trying to live a life according to God's will, according to God's plan, not everybody in the world is going to be happy for you.And the world, the culture that we live in will probably tell you that you're wrong. It'll probably tell you and try to paint you as this or that, tell you hate people or hate this. And the culture is trying to manipulate you and try to lure you back into living under the influence of the world. So people will laugh, but don't worry about being persecuted. You should worry when you're not getting persecuted. Because if you are not raising some eyebrows,and you are not people are not being influenced, or people are not being maybe moved or at least taken back by your stances in life, then are you actually living a life according to God's plan? Are you living under God? Or in that case, are you living so far under the culture of the world that there is no differentiating you from the person next to you? We are called to live holy, set-apart lives here on earth. We are called to be ambassadors for God, right? We talked about that last week. Ambassadors for God. We are set apart, a holy nation, a royal priesthood of believers. So don't worry about being persecuted. You should start worrying when you're not being persecuted. Time for some self-reflection when that begins to happen. I close this morning with this. Some of you need to hear it today. And you're going to need to hear it over these next few weeks. No matter who is president, Jesus is still our King. No matter who is president, Jesus is still our King. So are we living our lives under the influence of our God? Or are we living our lives under the influence of culture? Think about that scale this morning. Think about those things you need to resolve in your life. Let's bow our heads and pray to our God right now. God, we resolve ourselves to live our lives according to your will, according to your plan. God, we understand that sometimes, and maybe this is the moment, we need to spiritually wake up and recognize the things that we need to change in our lives. And God, I pray this morning, no matter if someone identified this morning as a 1 or 5 or a 10 on that scale, God, that we would all think about the things in our lives that we are resolving, drawing a line in the sand, saying that we are not going to cross that line. We are resolved and predetermined to live our lives under the influence of God, not under the influence of this world. And this morning, God, for anybody here and anybody watching and listening this morning that is struggling in one of these areas in their life, God, you reveal that to them. And they, at this moment, this time, God, they resolve to living a life according to your will, according to your plan. And they will get out of the influence of the world and under the influence of Almighty God. And God, if there's anyone here this morning who has never had a time and place in their life where they surrendered themselves to you, God, I pray that they would pray to you this morning, pray to you right now. God, I am a sinner in need of salvation. Forgive me of my sins. Help me to live under your rule, under your power, under your grace, so that one day I will live with you eternity. God, thank you for this morning. Amen.